Welcome back. So in the break, I checked my Twitter account, and there are hundreds and hundreds of tweets from people. And there are small things that people have been tweeting about. For example, running a red light. If you run a red light, that's not necessity. You don't have to be poor to run a red light. Nothing. It's just a sense of entitlement, really, that the law is not, it's for everybody else and not for you.
I don't think it has anything to do with corruption. Basically, it has to do with what we call the obedience to law. It's a rule. And in fact, if we go back and study a little, we'll find this simple example, this very same example being given by Professor H.L.A. Hart in his famous book, The Concept of Law. The first step towards a social obligation to obey the law is to stop at the red light.
Right. But we don't stop at red lights. We don't stop, we don't give way to ambulances, and we bribe policemen.
Well, I set up this project, my first little project on anti-corruption, and I was learning as much as the other people were learning when we did this project. And to basically combat the sense that, oh, there's nothing we can do, we'll always have corruption, we'll always have poverty, I tried to sort of show what happened in Hong Kong. Hong Kong in the late 60s, a British territory as it was then, was very, very corrupt. The British police in Hong Kong were very, very corrupt. People paid tea money for things. People went to hospital.
Tea money? We have it here. It's called chai pani.
They paid corruption for everything.
Right.
There was a highly corrupt society, but there was no. There was nothing from the top to basically say, we're going to challenge this. It was like a climate of impunity. Then I think a governor came on board and said, actually, I'm going to give up my Rolls Royce, I'm going to walk to work, I'm going to actually get rid of all the Hong Kong police who are corrupt. And actually, I think he got rid of 46%. He says, I don't care how much it costs, we're going to get rid of this, we're going to do this, do that. And in the space of, they had a lot of criticism, but in the space of like 3-4 years, institutional changes, things did start to seriously change. Now, as we know, Hong Kong is no longer a very corrupt society. It can happen. It happened there. It can happen elsewhere.
Okay, I've got a message here from someone who says that it's not our culture, it's now part of our DNA. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not.
No.
I think that, well, again, I come back to this. People are people everywhere you go. If you're standing at a red light and you know that there's nobody coming to hit you, there's no way you're going to get a ticket, nothing's going to happen, there's going to be no repercussions, you'll do it. It's not something about, it's just human nature, right? We're sort of doing all these calculations and we're figuring this out. So no, absolutely not. It's about your incentives, right? Why should you not do it? And one of the reasons is, well, I'll hit somebody, I'll harm society, something like that. And that comes through education, knowing why the law is there. I should stop at a red light because it's the safe thing to do, and so on.
I should stop at a red light, it's the safe thing to do, and someone else can drive through their green light with certainty, knowing that I'm not going to hit them.
You used the word accountability a few moments ago, and it applies to a red light. If you run past a red light, you're accountable for your actions. If you're in charge of public funds, you're accountable for those funds. So I think accountability is crucial, and if you have the means to ensure accountability, be it the rule of law, be it an audit, that's the way to combat it.
So how do you clean up a system? How do you change things? How do you now move from this system where people are running red lights and doing terrible things to, I've got a message here from Asad Omar, who's done loads of work on this, and he's talking about greater parliamentary oversight of the executive, independent investigative agencies, greater transparency, independent judiciary,
I would agree with this.
Enforcement of the rule of law.
Agree with this.
Right to information.
Yes, I would certainly agree with all the recommendations or suggestions made there, because you see, we've got to have mechanisms set in. We don't have any mechanism by which any checks or balances are available. We need a mechanism whereby we need a very autonomous accountability agency like NAB. We've had an example of that in India, in fact, the CBI. The Central Bureau of Investigation was initially under the Home Ministry, still is. But then by a public interest litigation case, very well known, it's known as the Vineet case. In 1997, it was the judiciary and the executive and the parliament which got together, and they made CBI so autonomous and so powerful that today it's a very, very effective, I would say, investigative agency. I think we need to do that with NAB also. In fact, I think NAB
But how do you
legislation is on the way.
how do you make an agency effective? I mean, we have all these agencies in Pakistan, but they seem to be reasonably toothless.
They actually are. The law is the problem, basically.
Why is the law the problem?
The law is a problem, you see, because when we talk about taking into account this issue of corruption and targeting those people or companies or individuals, the most important area is what we call accountability, and in that accountability is what needs to be there is the transparency.
But the law is transparent, the law is articulated, it's there. Is it the law that's the problem or enforcement of the law that's
The
the problem?
enforcement of the law is as much a problem as the law itself.
The law itself is a problem.
Yes.
So you're saying the law is it's not a good law.
It's not a good
The
law.
laws
It
need
needs
to be rewritten.
It needs to be legislated further. So
Revisited.
that, yes, so that
Are there a lot of loopholes in?
there are many loopholes in it, many loopholes in that law. I think it needs to be reshaped, and I think the Parliament is working on it at this time.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I think there's no one single silver bullet. I mean, it's neither the law nor we all know this. It's neither
not
the,
Imran
it's
Khan.
neither Imran Khan, the law, particular agency. It's everything working in concert, and it includes. I go back to the people. I mean, you have 1 million people, 100,000 people who come out and demonstrate. But actually, what if those 100,000 people or million people actually have the means to get involved and engaged at a regular daily level? If you give people the ability to understand, to access, to engage, to participate, not simply once every 4 years at election time, that's not democracy, but get them able to engage at a daily level, at the local level, and then you have 1 million people, 100,000 people actually working, being the eyes and ears. That's the watchdog. The people are the watchdog. I think there's a famous saying by a former Secretary of State for Education in the United States saying, only the people can hold the government accountable. And I think that's a crucial truth.
I think, yeah, I really do think that that's at the core of this issue. I mean, one thing just generally we need to enforce or reinforce in people is that government works for you. Right? Their public servants are public servants. So when somebody says, well, I work for the government, actually what they should be saying is, I'm a public servant. I work for you. And that's of core importance at this issue.
But people don't think they work for anyone, but they work for themselves and for their own interests.
But then you go basically the people then basically do the demand side of anti-corruption. Say, we don't care what you think, you're a public servant. The subtitle of our project in the Philippines was, It's Our Money. If you build public ownership of public funds, then no matter what the bureaucrat or the politician will say, the public will say, no, sorry, you're wrong.
It's our money.
Yes, it's our money.
Okay, because I've got a whole load of tweets here from a guy called Ali Rahman, who's talking about enforcement as well. He says that unless you enforce, nothing's going to happen. But on education, he's raised a point. He said the tragedy is that it's the educated. It's those who are in positions to change other people's lives. It's the educated population that are the corruptors. They're the ones who are the most corrupt.
Because there's no accountability.
They devise the systems. And it just trickles down to the bottom then.
If put a few of these educated people who break the laws, who are not accountable, in jail, and then you'll see things starting to change. If there's no censure, there's no punishment. There's no punishment, of course. Human nature.
A very famous anthropologist once said, and I'm paraphrasing, that everything starts from the rural areas. It's the farm, it's the food producers, everywhere in those rural, we don't really consider that side of things, but it's very important. And so if I can talk about them, and you think about, well, it's fine, you give them all the demand side tools, but on the supply side, there's also this additional problem of the politician owns everything. Right? He owns like all the land. He owns their political will. People think they'll get in trouble if they vote against him, and so he sort of controls their lives, and that's a fundamental issue. I mean, I think a lot of the idea that government is something that's separate, that's not part of us, begins precisely there.
Exactly.
That this is, they own us. The
They
government
own
owns
us. But I think, that people sort of subscribe to the colonial mindset. They say, this is something that's left over from a time when you were ruled by a colonial master, and so there were the rulers and the ruled, and that whole democratic ethos hasn't seeped in and hasn't taken root.
America, I think, I went to school in America for a while. Chicago is famously a sort of a politically corrupt town. New York, Tammany Hall, the Gilded Age. America was very corrupt, parts of America in those days. Things have changed. They got a handle on it. So to talk about colonialism or culture is, I think, an avoidance of the issue.
Avoidance of the issue.
Yes.
And what is the issue?
The issue is get off your bottoms and actually take responsibility. Also, a little bit is about confidence. If you have the confidence, and that goes back to the education and the skills, if you have the ability to understand, if you can understand how money is raised, taxes and what have you, if you can understand where I can actually get involved, then you have confidence, and then you actually can speak at the same level of the politician to say, no, I beg to disagree because it's our money, you work for us, the people.
Well, it's a really great system, and I can just about imagine everyone who's watching this program going, yeah, sure. Because the systems are such, or they're designed in such a way that they exhaust you. So you're desperately trying to survive as a poor person in a country like this.
It's not easy.
So you're desperately trying to survive, and at the same time you're knocking on the door saying, I want accountability, I want the rule of law, I want this to work. And eventually you get so exhausted, you just go back to saying, okay, forget it.
Yes,
I'll just pay the guy off, I'll eke out my little existence, and I'll die quietly.
But I think you've made a good point that actually the citizen has a responsibility as well. It's for the citizen to actually make the society in their own idea and the dreams. So it's not enough to demand. You actually have to put in some time. I think there's a lot of concern in some Western European countries that there's not enough citizen participation. So actually, maybe more corruption is coming back to Western Europe. And let's not forget, the battle against corruption is an ongoing one. It's never won. As soon as you give up, it'll come back and bite you.
It comes back again.
I think Alan and Sheheryar have made a very good point there. Basically, it's the common person, the citizens, who have to take the ownership. And while they are legal, they are experts in their own areas, I did a little research and I came across a very interesting part where it was actually a social movement which changed the mind of India. And that I can give, and I can cite that as an example, that there is this custom of sati which used to take place. Now, they had the laws, the British brought in the laws, but it didn't work. But finally it was a social movement which was started by a Raja from Bengal, Raja Ram Mohan Roy. He started that movement, and sati is no longer there.
But how do you change mindsets? That's the thing. We have huge populations. Pakistan has a population almost approaching 200 million. I mean, how do you change the mindset of all these people? How do you get them to understand what the problem is and how they can deal with it, how they can become concerned citizens, how they matter, how they have a voice? I would imagine one way is through the vote, where they need to realize how valuable their vote is. But then you get into that chicken and egg, as they say, where the candidate is the same candidate.
In my experience, it is experience. We did a little thing where in 4 areas where the local citizens were getting tired of being ripped off by the local government unit. Basically, they were ignored. They were shut out. They didn't know where the money was going. They knew the local government was corrupt, but the local government poo-pooed them away. Then the individuals got organised. They worked with the local radio stations. The radio stations used to be competing against each other, they came together. Civil society came together in this group. Even some people who were civil servants in this local government unit joined this people's movement, and they knocked on the door to say, excuse me, we are the people, we are now actually wanting to know how our tax has been spent, we're wanting to engage in this and that. And then the local government actually started to get a little bit worried because these people were organised, and it can be done at a very local level. So it's not necessarily changing the mindset, it's a day-by-day process whereby these people actually start to say, well, actually, individually, on my own, I can't do anything. If we get together, if we know a little bit more about the law and our entitlements and what we want, then we can actually start to change things.
do something. So the media could play a vital role.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is an important point, because I could say something sort of very trite and say, so, well, land reform, right? That's very, very important. India implemented that many years ago, and they actually, and that was a brilliant move, and that would be great to implement here as well. But then you ask, okay, well, who's going to implement land reform and so on?
The landed.
Yeah, the landed. They're not going to say, yeah, take money away from me, I'm fine. You know, it's not going to work
my
like
land, I've got extra.
Exactly right. But then, so if you think about it, well, where does the demand? These guys can't run their lands without the people, right? So if the people rise up, that's a problem.
Not heard of mechanized farming, obviously.
Well, there is that.
No, unfortunately, we're totally out of time, but it's an interesting discussion because corruption, I mean, we're supposed to be one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And everybody says it's endemic and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it, but I'm glad to hear that there is a lot you can do about it. The key that I get out of today is that unless the people want to do something about it, nothing is going to happen. No one individual is the panacea. You have to get off your bottoms, as you said. Get out there and do some work. So, I mean, I really sincerely hope that, you know, people are motivated enough or pushed against the wall hard enough to get up and do it. Mr. Akmal Wasim, Dr. Sheheryar Banuri, and Mr. Alan Davis, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was really interesting, and I hope you have a good trip back, and thank you for coming to Pakistan.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. If you have an opinion, would like to be on this show, have something to say about corruption, how we can deal with it, we the citizens can deal with it, how we can get rid of it, write into us 24/7 at businessplusTV.pk.